Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Fortress Fun. It's actually been a while, but I'm looking to focus more on fort videos, and I had a review sent in for me by Stabs, and he was fine making it a public video. So I'm gonna put out this as like a pseudo review of his gameplay, um, as well as an indicator for like how to play attack. His position in this video is center, but this I'm gonna look to cover like attacking themes and strategies as well for like him to follow and for anyone else who's in center or usually like it's wingers, like you're in first, the 2 and 3 position when you're starting out. So this will help here as well. We're gonna go through some of the things. So I looked through the whole game and I got a bunch of edits done to it first before even making this, and then I'm gonna edit in a bunch of examples. So we're gonna skip through the rounds like and go in sequential order of like what a round will look like from the opening grind to how to attack as center, to attacking the enemy sweep, then attacking the def, then what do you do once you get in. The video's got it all like right down to winning a round, which Stabs had taken active part in. So this first little bit, we're in round 1 here. This is what I first want to cover. Already we have something to talk about. This is what we call a double team, where the winger did not split the usual way. He didn't go just straight out like this. He instead went all the way in to attack the enemy center and got a kill for it. With Stabs, he did a defensive approach, which was to seal this line. And at the start, that's good because you don't know what the enemy winger is going to do, but we could also see UG did as well. And it looks like there's a little bit of lag here because that is way too small of a double bind to have happened. But he also went defensive. So as center, you're going to be looking for what your enemy center's doing and for what your wingers want to do. I do not recommend doing this without coordinating with your team. I recommend just going straight out to the edge because of what LP Skit 13 is doing, which is going to be going zooming fast to get right into the enemy zone. That is one of the deficits of doing this. But it does get his team up a person, and living in fort is like the most important thing. If you stay alive, that is great. Then you learn how to be useful while being alive. That's even better. And so what I'd recommend for Stabs here is keep in mind that this guy wants to double team, which means this side will be blocked off a lot of the time, and you can go aggressive this way to close in the enemy center in this small space, and that'll hopefully kill them, getting your team up a point. And so with the double team example, we're gonna skip ahead here. Another example of a double team happened, but this was like a failed attempt. So you can see Dano puts in this long line to block off UG. So UG's only way is to go out here. And Stabs kind of reacted well, but this triple wastes him time, but he still kind of gets the kill. He just doesn't complete the kill. You see, he didn't quite stab, and then UG gets out ahead. And he tries surviving in here, does quite well, but ultimately dies. And so that's an example of like what to do to successfully get the double team. And we finish our arc in round 10, where he does complete the double team. So it was a very close thing, but he pushes UG in and gets the double team off. So that's the first thing to look at. When you're attacking, you have a 2 that's going to double team you. So Stabs was learning over time as the game went for how to capitalize on that opening. So at the start, we're back to round 1, right? One of the things we want to look at is actually how center gets to the enemy def, the enemy line. So there's something called a center line. You know, it's the enemy center's line. And what some centers will do is stab this line to go down into the enemy zone, which is something that he could do here in this position. If he had more rubber, I think 1.5. If groceries did his job, the enemy sweep's job is to stab this center line harder than anyone else can, or also to wait for it to disappear or to wrap themselves around it so that nobody can get into the enemy def zone if something like this happens where your center dies off the rip. So we're going to look at some center line examples. Stabs never goes for a center, and there's nothing bad about that, but I kind of wanted to point it out. Like, I wanted to point it out to him so that he could at least try it if he saw it again when he's center. And this is something that position 1 can do a lot more frequently than the other 2 positions, like 2 and 3, because they're right there. They're ready to go into a center line. So this round has a good example of like how to identify where a center line is, or when to do a center in particular. So first up, we have a completely unbottled grind. And then we, if we see that, we know we could technically center and live a higher percentage of chance. Because what good defs will do is draw like a bottle around this so that anyone who goes in gets killed by the bottle. But good centers can identify the center line. So the center line is the line drawn from the first person here, Yuji, and it's meant to be stabbed on either side. And right now you have both options available to you. If Yuji had turned this, then you would only have this side available, but Yuji would be protecting it going this way. So most likely you wouldn't be able to center during that. But if we just play this out a couple more seconds, we can see Stabs now has free reign to go here and stab that line in. And I think in this position, Stabs was unsure about what he could do or what he should do. And so I'd recommend, you know, if the rule of thumb is that after the split occurs, you have 3 seconds for it to be optimal. At 3 seconds, it's optimal. 5 seconds is a bit late. If you center 1 second, it's a bit early. It's like a really sweet spot to center if they have a bottle, but they don't have a bottle. Stabs goes this way and turns around, so he's a bit late. But if we look at what bottle is formed here, this is a box. That's not a bottle. Like, that is space in a sumo zone that anybody, especially somebody like Stabs, could maze in and be fine in. And the one-way ticket to it is this center line. And so that's something to take. This is a good example of it, but there also are some like bad examples of when not to go for it. And I found them in the video. So right here, this is the very next round. This is a center line. On the split, we have Dillo's line right here. And then we have Yuji's line right here. So there is this one spot where you could center between his line and his line. But it, you know, it's very tiny, and you need like around 3 rubber to hit that and get through the seal. And so you just have to do is stab this part, then stab that part. And if you're not perfect with your breaks, and you need like a lot of breaks and you don't have much, then it's just going to be a whole mess. So this is a bad one to go for. You don't really want to go for that. You want to go for an easy one. Still, also, you can see that the enemy def is a box. It's not really a bottle. Like, you'll be able to live in that. So those are just some examples of like center line. Now we're going to get to like attacking sweep and just attacking in general, like how to get to sweep. So this round is the same round, just a little bit later, but it gives me like at least a good example of what I should be looking for as center if I don't center at the start and if I don't double team. The third strategy is like the speed tunnel. So I actually want to decrease the distance from me to the enemy winger's line. So I should be pretty close here. I don't need to stab it. I just want to be very close. And the point is that I run along the side here, gaining speed. You're going to hear me talk about speed even more as we get to attack, because speed's like the number one thing to attack with. So I'm gaining speed, and it's all for the sake of re-sending myself back through a tunnel between two walls. That'll give me the most speed. So if you're near one wall, it gives you some speed. If you're in between two walls, it gives you twice as much speed. I think. I'm not sure. But you do go pretty fucking fast. So getting close, grinding it out at that same distance so you can reverse triple in, stab it a little bit so that you don't, kill yourself on this corner. And speed out will get you there faster. But we'll see what Stabs does is he just kind of turns back. And so now he's going like 34 miles an hour to here, which it doesn't do much. Seeing this actually now as we look at it, there is something called the center seal. Not a set, yeah, the center seal. We have the center line, and then there's the center seal. So this is the center seal. This is what the sweep's job is, to make sure the enemy attack can't get through. But Wong's didn't place it that well. You can, if you want to get to the def as soon as possible, the quickest way is through here. So the enemy is tasked with making this as complicated as possible so you can't get through it. But since we can pause the game, we can inspect it. So, and knowing about it existing is also important. A stab here, a stab there, and you're in. Because it was lightly stabbed here and just tapped there. We saw Wong's do it. So you could just stab through, and then you're through and in the def, and you can mess up their sweep. Something like going here, boxing out groceries, going back this way, boxing out Wong's. And you can get yourself like this whole front of space for your team to hole, for you to cut. These are like attacking ideas. Holing, cutting, long straight lines, pushing off the enemy, getting yourself next to the def. And so a center seal could do that. When it comes to attacking sweep now, so let's, considering he didn't send the seal, you now have the task of breaking the enemy's sweep. So they're going to set up this box, which they do. They now have a box around the def. And the way to push off this box is to actually keep your distance from it when they're not around. So Stabs putting his line onto the box is not recommended. You always want to keep your line away if they're not around, and you pressure them when they're close. So we're going to see what happens. There was also pressure there that you could take. Just by going and grinding your line, you'll gain a lot more speed. And since Wong's has a huge gap, you might even be able to, cut through and take all that space in the front. But you're not grinding any line, and you can't really follow him. Right here, he kind of did. The other sweep, died. And so now you have a chance to attack def. And here is like a good example of holding. But, didn't see it, you turn back. But this is the kind of stuff that makes pickup 4 kind of difficult if you don't have quick chats. Because right here, you can't really communicate with your teammate because you're not in voice call. But if this is an unguarded def line, like 2-to-1, and you want to check to make sure. Yeah, it says enemies 5, friends 3. So in this example, it's actually bad to hole. So you wouldn't hole. But I want to show this example for holding is possible. How do you identify holding? you find two teammates with an unprotected death line, and you have one person stab in, kill themselves, and the other one follows in their line, kind of like a landing strip. They just get to stab it so they can go through. And in this example, if you're worried, there is a rule of thumb where, like, let's say Tag Knife was even closer. One of the rules of thumb is that if you and a teammate are going in opposite directions, neither of you ever turn towards the other in any capacity. You just kind of keep going straight. So yeah, let's say I did want to triple back, but my teammate's going this way. I will just keep going straight. It's a way to not die. It's like a common rule that was unspoken for a while, but it's kind of lost as more people join the game. But that's something that doesn't happen quite often. Like, it's good to know that rule too, because if Tag Knife like was going to be closer, like super close right here, neither of you freak out knowing that there's a rule of thumb where you both just go straight. It's just like a nod. Yeah, here's unfortunate because they both kind of freaked out and tripled back. They both kind of turned away from each other, not understanding. Maybe they didn't understand, but that led him stabs to die. Next, we have the examples of how to attack the death. So let's say you break the sweep. You have an unprotected death line, but you're kind of alone. This is a great example. You want to keep a bit more space. The only reason you ever stay close to this line is if there's a sweep behind you trying to cut you off from being next to the death. And then all you would have to do is stab this line harder than they have, or even put a trap on this edge and make sure they die, and then you're good. So knowing like, oh, I want to have clear focus from the clear focus from the enemy death, or like clear space. Like, this is too little space. When I'm attacking death, I want to be like this far out, and I want to be gaining so much speed using long straight lines. Stabs sort of kind of does this, but it's a bit backwards. He has his line close to the death, so he has some space for him and the death, but he's not utilizing his line as a way of gaining speed. He's like keeping this open box. And I'd really recommend him like stabbing. He's laying this outer line, which is good, but on your next rotation, stab it like that and gain speed, and then go back on that same line and gain more speed. Stabs just kind of sends a bunch of zigzags, not knowing. Then he grinds that line. Like, he's starting to learn, but it's not good. And it's a bunch of zigzags. He technically could have had a cut there if he just wombled in. I will show that, because I think sometimes that can happen if the enemy death isn't good and they mess up. Isn't good as bad, but they mess up. Like, this is a mess up by the enemy death. Big womble. There's a gap now between them and their tail. All you have to do is somehow slow yourself down. So what you could do is slam on these brakes, and then as their tail clears and as they move forward and you don't, then you just cut in like this. You just take a right. Or since he did a womble, you yourself could do a womble and shoot in instead of completing the womble. And I'll show you what that looks like. You see? See how fast they're both going? Slamming your brakes is like the number one way to make sure this cut works 10 times out of 10. If you slam your brakes, you're going like 3 miles per hour slower. So you almost have something, you push for something. You're trying to gain speed. This is good. These are all the wombles. So you just clear out the wombles and you triple back to gain speed. This is great, but I would not get close to the death like this, especially when they're hiding. Like, this guy is 5 inches, what I would call a nautical mile behind his tail. You have to send this like PT, like, really try to cut him, because he's going to be super far behind his tail. I would just make sure you don't even put your line next to theirs. That is my recommendation. So next, we have another example that could happen for attacking the death. If your hole gets off successfully, or if somebody unluckily dies, but they die on the enemy death's line, so it leaves a hole. This is that example. You see Rin just died and it left a hole. Now, if I'm Stabs, I'm looking to hit the hole before the enemy sweep gets there. So our plan of action should be to hit this hole. But how do we hit like a hole that isn't lined up? Well, there's a technique for that. But the timing here, it's kind of stressful. So it's also important to notice that we have a lot of time for this hole to clear anyway, because the death just passed. So if we're able to block off the enemy sweep somehow, like this, which I think we might be faster. Okay, that triple double back didn't work or didn't help. Like, I should just have been beelining it here. But I really just want to cut him off. So considering that he didn't turn in, this is good. I now have full time. And it's actually that same maneuver, this turn away maneuver, that is going to help us. Like, I want to shoot right in, but it's pretty difficult to line up. So what I do is I act like I'm going to shoot in and I take this turn. That way, if this line is lined up to here, I can just stab it and go through. But if it's not lined up, let's say I overshoot it a bit, then I don't die. That's the whole point. Because right now we're going to see Stabs take an attempt at hitting this, not knowing what the technique is. So that's one way to hit this hole. There's actually another way. You see how these lines are like slightly off center? Like this line's that way, that line's that way. Let me do this instead. That means there's like a little gap there. And we can use that gap to our advantage. I can also stab this line, drive straight. So now my line's technically lined up with that, and then stab this to get in. So we have two techniques. We have the, can't do a stab, line it up. This is like the second technique. I really should have taught you this second. Because the go-to technique is find a line that you can just stab and line yourself up as and get through. You never need to cold turn something when you have this much time. You never need to just go boop, oh, I had a nasty turn. Like, yeah, that's great and all, but the technique, you have this and you also have this. So let's see what Stabs tries to do. Like, he had some kind of an idea to set up a line, but he wasn't sure which line. And in the moment, you don't have all of this time, but that's one way to, those are both the way to like hit a hole that doesn't look hittable. The third one is just hitting it without any kind of setup. You just go in. And then you're in. So the final part will be like, you're in the zone. How do you attack when you're in the zone? So in this example, the enemy def actually died on accident, and Stabs gets a massive portion of the zone. Now it's like, I have a massive portion of the zone. What do I do about it? And so far, he's doing the right thing. You take as much space as possible. It's almost like sumo, except the zone doesn't shrink. So you're going to have to be proactive. You can't just sit here and go around, because the zone's never going to shrink. You're just going to be shrinking infinitely. So one way is that you want to stay close to the edge of your tail so you can pop out and expand. Maybe we can find an example of that here. This is a long round. So he's letting his tail catch up to him, hopefully, so he can make these expansions. I like keeping as much as possible here, but now you can see that it's just shrinking. It's good. You just want to keep all that space too, though. So like something like this even, to just expand out. You don't need to stay in the zone. You just need more of the zone than you're to get more of the zone. So because they're over there, like staying in the zone, you're not going to capture it. So by going out this way, you get all of this space here for yourself now. And then you want to get this little bit of space. Then you want to get that little bit of space. And you want to push it until you get all the space. And in a circle, it's kind of tough, but Stabs is genuinely doing like the right thing with like this little like thing. Yeah, and he starts to expand. You see, he's grabbing more space. So this is the right thing to do. If he's wondering, oh, am I doing the right thing? You're absolutely doing the right thing. You're getting as much of the zone as possible, but I'd even min-max it, like stab here before you have to duck under, because that's a little bit of a weird trace, and then just wait for your tail to come around so you can start expanding again. And like the enemy def is just outside of their zone too, so you might even start to spin it to capture it. So we're going to see it. The zone's just spinning up. But right there, like that's kind of a bad move. You don't want to allow such a massive gap between you and your tail, because they're going to be trying to cut you. So now you're actually effectively functioning as a def, but, you know, an aggressive one. So making sure you always have that. Don't do some kind of hook stuff when you're waiting. Always be waiting with binds that you could immediately react to and stop your opponent from getting in. Now we have our last example of attacking in the zone. And this example is, it's kind of a rough scenario, because this scenario really shouldn't happen, where you have nobody covering the front and you just kind of slide in. This should never happen. Somehow the enemy sweep and the enemy def just aren't ready. They're not set up. They're not ready to stop it, and you get in. So now you're like, what do I do in here? He does good. It's basically just sumo. You want to defend against your enemies, so you make a box, make sure no one can get into your box. But you then have to take the second step of expanding your box safely. And this is kind of where he goes wrong. You have a massive gap here, and then you turn out. So now you've lost your box because somebody just cut in and took that space. And the whole point of attacking is to have more space in the zone than your opponent. But you kind of messed up there. I don't know how to describe this. So what I recommend is that since you're an attacker, you can stay outside of the zone. You just need to have some kind of way into the zone. So driving away here is good, because you're also not looking to get yourself pincered between these two guys. You're just looking to take away space and then put pressure. So since this line is disappearing, I could even look to drive out straight, wait for it to disappear, turn back this way. If he turns back this way to attack me, this line is still disappearing. So I could just go here, and then I know that this guy's coming around, so I'm going to exit before he does. And since I've drawn something into their def line, and there's still a bunch of line, like my line is even shrinking this way, I might be able to go back in this way. It's a bunch of like moving in and out, making sure I'm not going to die to these guys or get pushed into a box. Worst thing to do is get boxed, because that's how you also kill somebody in Fort. So the best thing you do is box somebody. So even looking to like get a box around Wong's and shrink them, and you know, finish them off in here, that would be the ideal thing to do. But you can also look to expand your space and take more. There's a lot more in depth, but in this particular example, I wanted to show this because you weren't quite sure about where you wanted to go, and you like moved out of the zone when you could have just slightly expanded your box and been in the middle of the zone with all that space. That would have been the best here. But once you do this, you got to know what you're getting yourself into. You go back, you kind of fight, and they pincer you, and then you die. So that's a wrap for Fortress Fun. We went through opening with double team. We went through how to identify center lines. We went on how to attack sweep and def in certain scenarios, how to enter holes more safely that are there, and what your overall plan should be when you're attacking in zone. There are, of course, plenty, like a myriad more of situations, and I'm sure we'll get to those with more reviews. So please send me reviews and I can make them public. That way we can discuss more about Fort, and we can see all of the positions. That was an attacking position, but we could even do defending positions and even the defense position itself.